Muito bom dia a todas e todos. Meu nome é Carla Ventura e eu sou coordenadora do Polo de Ribeirão Preto do Instituto de Estudos Avançados da Universidade de São Paulo. É uma honra estar com vocês aqui hoje, no início desse ciclo de formação, Programa de Redes Climáticas e Justiça Ambiental no Sul Global, Brasil e Angola. Esse ciclo de formação está sendo organizado pelo Grupo de Pesquisa em Criminologia Experimental e Segurança Pública do nosso polo, do Instituto de Estudos Avançados, em Ribeirão Preto, em parceria com a Universidade Jean Piaget de Angola, também da plataforma de divulgação científica Ombala do Saber e o Amazônia Research Center. Então, nós teremos encontros semanais até o dia 28 de julho para tratar desse tema tão importante e para, em conjunto, pensarmos a formação dessa rede climática e de justiça ambiental. Eu agradeço muito o professor Eduardo Diniz e a professora Ruth Estevão, que lideram o grupo de pesquisa em criminologia experimental e segurança pública, que organizaram este evento. Agradeço também os professores Mosquito Garrido, a professora Berta Camargo, o professor Patrício Jeremias, o professor Samuel Vitorino, o professor Paulo Inglês, que está aqui conosco também, né, por essa parceria que eu espero que seja muito frutífera no futuro. E agradeço o professor Inze Fula Ngueng, que é o nosso convidado de hoje, que em conjunto com o professor Patrício irão tratar do tema Justiça Ambiental e Climática. Então, desejo a todos e todas um excelente curso, um excelente ciclo de formação e passo, então, a palavra para o professor Samuel. Muito obrigada e um excelente dia para nós. Professor Samuel?
Ativei agora o microfone. Muito obrigado, professora Carla Ventura. E, mais uma vez, bom dia a todos e todas. Para a Universidade Jean Piaget de Angola, é um prazer poder fazer parte deste evento muito importante, porque as questões climáticas são importantes para todos nós, a humanidade está em perigo e todos nós estamos interpelados a tratar dessas questões com muita seriedade. Enaltecemos a iniciativa do Instituto de Estudos Avançados de Ribeirão Preto por dar essa oportunidade de partilha de conhecimento sobre as questões climáticas. Esperamos que tudo corra bem durante os próximos dias e a UniPiaget assume o compromisso de fazer parte dessa rede para poder aprender muito mais e participar desta grande tarefa que é a proteção do clima e a salvaguarda do planeta. Muito obrigado.
Professor Patrício Jeremias.
Deixa-me saudar também aqui todos, em especial o corpo docente que está aqui presente da filial da Universidade de São Paulo, na pessoa da professora Carla, da professora Ruth, do professor Samuel e os outros colegas que estão aqui, sem desprimor também para os meus colegas angolanos, né? Professor Paulo, também seja bem-vindo. E dizer que nós estamos aqui, a Universidade, a Organização Ombala do Saber, tem esse propósito, esse condão de ser aquela fazedora de pontes entre os diferentes entes da sociedade que estejam interessados na partilha de conhecimento e por força e circunstância, exatamente, do momento que nós vivemos, que é imperioso que a gente faça alguma coisa pelo planeta e que deixemos obra feita. Então, estamos aqui para que esse propósito seja alcançado, né? Nós temos trabalhado já com outras organizações não governamentais e também instituições do Estado para que o clima seja um dos aspectos que a gente possa estudar, analisar e ver as perspectivas de criar dentro deste uma melhor salvaguarda dele. E nesse conjunto de coisas, quando apareceu a oportunidade de trabalhar com o Instituto de Estudos Avançados da USP, então foi uma grande oportunidade que nós não quisemos perder, porque, como vimos, o mundo é global, né? Nós temos que começar a pensar global e agir localmente, mas isso como uma estratégia de ponto de vista profundamente humano, sendo que nós, como adultos de passagem, estamos aqui só para passar e, como peregrinos, devemos deixar para algumas pessoas, no caso concreto, as gerações vindouras, alguma obra. E então é nessa perspectiva que nós também abraçamos o propósito, estamos aqui com essa vontade de queremos, de uma maneira ou de outra, sermos partícipes, sermos não apenas produtores de conhecimento, mas agentes de transformação, né? Por isso é que estamos aqui e vamos dar o nosso melhor para que este evento seja o primeiro de muitos e que, para além desse, possamos organizar outros que também sejam aqueles que possam tocar no âmago e na atividade de todo o mundo. Ora, muito obrigado, desejo a todos bom trabalho e vamos continuar, estamos desse lado da backstage, a tratar do que for possível. Obrigado, nós, Angola do Saber agradece a disponibilidade de todos e a presença aqui hoje. Passo então a palavra à professora Ruth Estevam para dar continuidade ao nosso evento.
Bom dia a todos e a todos que estão também participando online. E parece que a minha imagem congelou, mas vocês estão ouvindo? Alô?
Perfeitamente, professora.
Tá
perfeitamente.
bom. A imagem parece que ficou congelada. Mas eu sou professora senha, então, da Faculdade de Filosofia e Ciências e Letras de Ribeirão Preto, e com o professor Eduardo eu participo, então, do grupo de Criminologia Experimental e Segurança Pública. E também, atualmente, eu sou a presidente da Associação Internacional de Criminologia de Língua Portuguesa. Então, eu estou duplamente feliz, né, de estar nesse evento, pela importância, né, do tema e pelo entusiasmo, não é, que o professor Eduardo tem em trabalhar nessas questões que são extremamente importantes, e pelos parceiros que nós estamos tendo aqui. E eu, como dos objetivos que a gente persegue muito na sociedade internacional de criminologia de língua portuguesa, é exatamente essa interação, esse contato, essa colaboração com os colegas, né, os parceiros de língua portuguesa. Também faço a palavra da professora Carla e do professor Patrício, que é um tema extremamente importante que nos toca a todos. Então, eu desejo que esse ciclo de formação seja o início realmente de uma colaboração bastante produtiva, pertinente, e que a gente consiga avançar. E fiquei também muito contente com o professor Paulo, que também é dos estudos aí universitários, não é? Que, junto com a professora Carla, eu acredito que vão poder fortalecer bastante a nossa colaboração. Desejo, então, um bom transcorrer, né, de todas essas semanas que nós vamos ter. Muito obrigada pela parceria, pela presença e pela transmissão de conhecimento. Muito obrigada. Eu não sei para quem que eu passo a palavra agora.
Agora é para mim, professora.
Por favor,
Eduardo. Eu queria, antes de tudo, né, com o meu imenso agradecimento às professoras Carla Ventura e Ruth Estevam, né, por me permitir aqui, uma vez mais, voltar à Universidade de São Paulo, agora sob outro chapéu, né, sob outra condição, agora na condição de pesquisador, né, num foro extremamente privilegiado, que é o Instituto de Estudos Avançados da USP, né, e numa perspectiva integrada a uma rede climática com grandes instituições do nosso país irmão, do outro lado do Atlântico, Angola, e também com o ARC, né, o Amazônia Research Center, tá? Para ser muito breve aqui, né, e depois eu vou voltar, vou mudar aqui a fala para o inglês, né, eu queria rapidamente explicar a ideia aqui da formação dessa nossa rede climática, né, que hoje começamos com o Brasil e Angola, mas já há interesse, né, de instituições mexicanas, colombianas e moçambicanas para se integrar aqui ao nosso grupo aqui. Nós estamos às vésperas da COP30 no Brasil, vai ser sediada em Belém, na Amazônia, né, acumulando uma série de notícias, né, extremamente preocupantes, como mais e mais exploração de petróleo no Brasil, ausência de propostas substanciais com relação à transição energética, acúmulo de conflitos no mundo todo, né? Numa perspectiva que acaba trazendo ainda mais, agudizando ainda mais as nossas questões relativas à injustiça climática, né? Para a gente começar a formar uma rede climática, de fato, que possa permitir um real intercâmbio, né, nós temos que, em primeiro lugar, escutar o outro, né, escutar os nossos parceiros, os países, irmãos, né, e depois começar a articular estratégias em comum. A estratégia, para nós, no âmbito universitário, mais facilmente perceptível é pelas vias da educação, né? Então foi por isso que nós criamos esse curso básico, né, para que a gente pudesse enfrentar ao menos 4 eixos fundamentais e 2 focos específicos daquilo que nós consideramos mais emergencial. Nós vamos discutir, primeiro, questões de justiça ambiental, depois nós vamos avançar em termos de políticas públicas, depois em questões de governança ambiental e climática, para depois fechar com discussões sobre o papel do setor privado nessa área. Os 2 tópicos emergenciais que nos parecem aqui aqueles mais facilmente perceptíveis para esse início de processo educativo é a orientação pela saúde pública, né, valendo-se da expertise que nós estamos acumulando dentro do próprio IEA, com grupos de pesquisas vinculados a grupos específicos da Amazônia brasileira, e também um projeto do Cinturão Verde, né, em torno de Manaus, que é uma parceria, né, do Instituto de Estudos Avançados, juntamente com a Defensoria Pública do Estado do Amazonas, né? Uma pequena anedota: o Cinturão Verde, ele é uma inspiração africana, na verdade, né, com a Wangari Maathai, né, a ativista queniana que inicia o movimento Green Belt aqui no Quênia, né? Depois ela é nomeada com o Nobel da Paz, inclusive por esse movimento, e que ele pode inspirar, na verdade, uma grande rede global de cinturões. Essa é a nossa visão no fim das contas, né? Depois disso, eu gostaria de ler rapidamente aqui o conceito por trás desse processo educativo e o que nos leva aqui, o que é que nos traz aqui no IEA, né? Para falar do conceito, agora, a partir desse momento, eu peço a licença de começar a falar inglês, né? E, sobretudo, com o meu broken English, com o meu inglês pouco aperfeiçoado, com o meu inglês nível intermediário, né? Por quê? Para que nós possamos iniciar uma colaboração que, de fato, seja global, que nós possamos não apenas escutar um ao outro, mas fazer com que a nossa voz atinja, né, um público global, internacional, para que a nossa rede climática, de fato, possa inspirar ações globais e planetárias, né? A gente precisa comunicar, né? E, lamentavelmente, o nosso legado colonial da língua portuguesa é algo que nos adstringe e muito no nosso campo de atuação. Eu sempre disse que o feio não é falar broken English, o feio não é falar errado inglês, o feio é não falar, né? Então, a partir de agora, eu tomo a liberdade de ler aqui o conceito do curso em inglês, né? Concept. The formation of climate networks between Brazil and Angola within the framework of environmental justice could be pivotal in addressing the challenge of planetary boundaries. Both countries share vulnerabilities in their tropical ecosystems, pressures on natural resources, and the disproportionate impacts of climate change on marginalized populations. Our goal is to strengthen technical, political, and scientific cooperation, promoting solutions for environmental justice and global warming through a more consistent social-related framework. This involves not only amplifying the voices of the most affected, but also developing a more definitive agenda with strategic recommendations for action. The Sahel region in West Africa and the Amazon face interconnected climate challenges, albeit in distinct geographical and ecological contexts. In the Sahel, monsoons are critical for agriculture and the livelihoods of millions, yet climate change has disrupted rainfall patterns, causing prolonged droughts and extreme floods, exacerbating food insecurity and resource conflicts. In the Amazon, deforestation and global warming are drastically altering rainfall regimes, impacting the hydrological cycle that sustain the forest, agriculture, and water supply across much of South America. Both ecosystems are vital for global climate regulation, and their degradation has consequences that transcend regional borders. Despite their differences, there are important parallels between the two regions. In both the Sahel and the Amazon, marginalized local populations bear the brunt of climate change. In the Sahel, rural communities are nomadic herders face the loss of productive land and water scarcity, while in the Amazon, indigenous peoples and riverine communities suffer from the destruction of their territories and livelihoods. Climate justice, therefore, demands that these communities be placed at the center of structural interventions in adaptation and mitigation policies. Environmental and climate justice is central to guiding the cycle of capacity building. Both Brazil and Angola face historical inequalities that exacerbate the impacts of climate change. In Brazil, the Amazon is a prime example, where deforestation and unregulated resource exploitation directly affect indigenous peoples and local communities. In Angola, desertification and soil degradation threaten the livelihoods of thousands of rural families. Leadership from these countries in promoting policies that balance economic development and sustainability could be decisive in ensuring a just transition to a low carbon economy that prioritizes inclusive practices for vulnerable populations. Public health issues intrinsically linked to climate change are also central to those debates. Cooperation between Brazil and Angola could yield significant advances in this area, as rising temperatures and shifting rainfall patterns have increased the incidence of diseases like dengue and malaria, while water scarcity and food security exacerbate health challenges. The exchange of experiences in epidemiological and social controls draw inspirations from the Green Belt movement, as I told you before. Inspired by this movement and based on extensive data collection using oral history techniques, the Institute of Advanced Studies, Polo Ribeirão Preto, research group on experimental criminology and public security, in partnership with the Public Defender's Office of the State of Amazonas, e thanks for Carlos Almeida for his support, has focused on studying the intersection of health, climate, and crime in the context of the Manaus Green Belt. This research emphasized social mobility indicators, public health, marginalization, and violence, as revealed through the oral histories of community leaders in urban, peri-urban, and rural areas of Manaus. There is great expectation that this climate network will enable the replication of such interventions in Angola, significantly strengthening health system resilience and benefiting millions of people highly vulnerable to the climate crisis. United by their colonial legacy, Brazil and Angola are global leaders capable of positively influencing international agendas, such as COP negotiations and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. By taking an active role in advocating for fair and ambitious climate policies, they can inspire other global South countries to pursue more genuine forms of sustainability. The creation of a bilateral climate network, and thanks a lot again for the Ombala do Saber for its support, could serve as a model for other nations, demonstrating how regional cooperation can amplify positive impacts in addressing planetary challenges. Well, from now on, I think that I need to open the floor for our keynote speaker, Imze Fula Ingenge, which is, well, in my opinion, I just learned recently the word when you're in face of somebody so extraordinary, you use the word, he's a maverick. Yeah, I didn't want to be simply replicating here the idea that he is a chairman of the African Diamond Council, mining engineer, and a highly respected senior strategy advisor, but more important than that, a true global leader. So thanks a lot for supporting our project, our Climate Network project. Thanks a lot for being this free critical thinker, one of a kind person. So it's a tremendous opportunity for us to listen to your speech today, Dr. Ingenge. We are very eager to debate with you. Thanks a lot. The floor is yours, yeah?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, can you hear me okay, everyone?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, fantastic. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present today. I also want to let you know that I'll be speaking on climate and environmental justice in the Global South, which is designed to build a bridge, not only build a bridge, but to help both Angola and Brazil utilize this bridge that we have between us. I also want to say thank you to my colleagues, professors and professoras, Said Estevão, Jeremias, Ventura, Vicente, and Ventura. I'm going to challenge a little bit your imagination today with my presentation. And I want you all to really imagine what a world where lush Amazon rainforest, a vital carbon sink, is reduced to ashes from something as simple as cattle ranching. Picture Angola's coastline where ancestral fishing grounds vanish from the rising seas. These particular realities are not accidents of nature. These are basically products of systems that were built on exploitation. Today, I want to really unravel how colonial legacies and modern extractivism fuel climate injustice in both Brazil as well as the Republic of Angola. I want everyone to understand how collective action is really forging paths to equity between the two countries. And I want to really highlight some of these statistics and facts that I may present to justify my case. The 1494 Treaty of Tordesillas, this was orchestrated by European powers, which divided the global South into regions or zones of extraction. The primary focus was to extract and to benefit those colonizers that were basically invading these particular areas for their benefit. In Brazil, for example, indigenous lands were seized for sugarcane plantations, while Angola's people were captured for the benefit of the transatlantic slave trade. These particular systems evolved into a modern trade agreements that prioritize foreign profits over local welfare, for example. For instance, Angola's oil or petroleum sector, 80% of which is exported. This is what fuels European and Asian economies, while 40% of our population here in Angola lacks electricity. In a country like Brazil, colonial land grabs are morphed into agribusiness empires. And we can see this historically, and we can see it also in the modern world. Soy plantations, largely for European livestock feed, consume 72% of fresh water in drought-prone regions, which are displacing small farmers and indigenous communities. Brazil's Amazon has lost over 20% of its forests since 1970, which is quite significant considering we've only been less than 60 years. Most of this is driven by illegal logging, it's driven by mining activities, and it's also being affected by agribusiness. In the Republic of Angola, offshore oil drilling leaks toxins into marine ecosystems that decimate fisheries that a lot of our coastal communities rely on to be sustainable. These particular industries, often backed by foreigners, prioritize short-term profit over ecological and human health. The climate poverty traps really tightens as deforestation in Brazil exacerbates droughts, crippling small-scale agricultural projects. In the Republic of Angola, oil wealth funds urban elites, while rural areas face energy poverty as well as desertification. International financial institutions, this is what assumes the responsibility to bankroll some of the most destructive projects that we have in front of us. Loans from Angola's oil infrastructure, this is what binds the nation to fossil fuels and pushes it in that particular direction, while Brazilian agribusiness is what benefits most from subsidies that are tied to deforestation. This particular cycle entrenches dependency. It leaves communities vulnerable to climate shocks. And the only way to transition out of this is within these oppressive systems, there are seeds of resistance that do take root. And I want us to really explore today how collective action can reshape the future and kind of restore and put things back on track. Across the Amazon, indigenous communities employ sustainable practices like agroforestry, cultivating crops without clear cutting. These particular methods preserve biodiversity while providing livelihood. And this is something I feel we should all be working towards. In urban Brazil, for example, we have some grassroots networks that convert landfills into community gardens, which mitigate food insecurity and also urban heat islands. Here in Angola, desertification is countered by reviving ancient water harvesting techniques, which no one now takes for granted. Many of those techniques have sustained and now are being used as an example worldwide. And if we look at some of the stone terraces or the check dams, these also have been used for centuries. And what this does is it slows erosion and it also replenishes the groundwater that exists in a country like Angola, which is even responsible for the entire country of Botswana in terms of water source. Coastal groups replant mangroves, which are nature's storm barriers, and these are designed to restore habitats as well as protect villages. These south-to-south alliances that I'm referring to, and many of you may understand this as the relationship between Africa or South America. These are designed and in place for us to benefit as well as bypass colonial power structures. And that's some of the key advantages that we have. Brazilian farmers share agroecological techniques with Angolan peers, and this is what puts us in position to reduce our reliance on chemical fertilizers. This should also be a very concentrated focus between the South-to-South relationship that I just mentioned. Transnational advocacy groups, this is what we can use to pressure global forums to prioritize climate reparations. We can demand that wealthier nations fund our ability to adapt or any losses that we may have. And we can also take advantage of digital platforms because this is what really connects activists worldwide. It puts us in position to share information and to offer suggestions to each or the other side to help us build an infrastructure that we both can be proud of for future generations. We can use these mechanisms to amplify demands to divest from fossil fuels. And a lot of these campaigns are targeting banks, funding deforestation, or drilling that reveals the power of collective pressure. Marginalized communities reframe the climate debate, and that's something we could potentially talk about at the end of this discussion. Indigenous knowledge systems, which view ecosystems as kin, this is what puts us in position to challenge Western notions of resource management, so to speak. Here in the Republic of Angola, oral histories that document ancestral resilience inspire modern adaptation strategies. And this is something that's rarely highlighted in some of these events, conferences, or platforms that focus on this particular topic. I want everyone to stop and consider something. Indigenous territories safeguard 80% of global biodiversity. And I want you to let that sink in for a minute. The million-dollar question that's rarely asked is, what might this world gain by centering their wisdom in these particular places? For, like example, for Brazil or for the Republic of Angola. Debt for Nature swaps offers a model. Angola could really redirect debt payments to fund mangrove restoration. Brazil's Amazon Fund, financed by international donors, this is what supports reforestation and indigenous land rights. Yet these remain small drops in the ocean. That global climate finance to Africa is just 3% of what is actually needed. And that's something that has to be re-examined as well as re-explored. Legal actions freeze illicit funds that are tied to environmental crimes. We need to really look into how those assets could benefit us in the long run, and we need to put mechanisms in place that help us recoup any funds that are lost as a result of this. There are recent seizures of assets from illegal miners in Brazil. This demonstrates a very high level of accountability and increases the potential for us to do what's right and to use ourselves as an example for others to follow. Ecocide laws, this is criminalizing mass environmental harm. It helps us gain traction globally. And we also need to do more exchange in terms of how we can improve our legal infrastructure to benefit some of the objectives and undertakings that we have in place. In 2023, Angola decided to ban plastic. What they focused on, they wanted to reduce ocean pollution, but I think it was a noble challenge. But what we realized with that initiative is we didn't have adequate enforcement, and much of the enforcement that we have in place remains very uneven. Effective policy must really be centered around marginalized voices, avoiding green colonialism that really is in place to displace communities for renewable projects. Land titling for indigenous groups in Brazil reduces deforestation by at least 65 or 66%. Replicating this will put Angola's communal lands in a position where they can protect the ecosystems while also empowering local stewardship. Open source satellite tools like Global Forest Watch, for example. This empowers communities to monitor deforestation in real time. In the Republic of Angola, efforts to track illegal waste dumping could be put in place to force corporate accountability. And I'm willing to stand behind initiatives like this that hold corporates responsible for any type of degradation of the environment that's in place that affects people here within these countries. When paired with ancestral practices, I think AI is something also that's very important because we can use AI to predict droughts. Much of that information that AI pulls from is based on traditional weather signs. I think we could do more to get the word out regarding our traditional methods that we use to advance technology such as AI. Much of this becomes a very incredibly powerful force for justice. And if we learn how to take our traditional side, incorporate it with our modern technology, this is what really puts us into position to have a strong case in the justice system. So now I'd like to make a few suggestions to highlight what exactly must be done. First, I feel that we must divest pensions from destructive industries. This is very important. We must demand transparency in corporate supply chains. We must amplify campaigns centering frontline voices. We all need to keep in mind that justice is not only passive, it requires dismantling systems that commodify life. And every time we look to improve or enhance our system, we need to consider that. Youth-led climate litigation from Brazil all the way to Angola sues governments for violating the right to a healthy environment. And that's something we all could contribute to in terms of creating a force or a mechanism or a coalition that was designed to make sure that we always had this we took it into serious consideration. These particular victories that set precedent are: the planet is a shared inheritance. It's not just a sacrifice zone. And I think collectively, if we all came aboard and we started to push that particular narrative, maybe we would have much more success into creating a very impressive, sustainable type of environment in both of these countries that we're talking about today. The global South is often painted as helpless, both in Angola and both in Brazil. Yet we do have some very pioneering solutions that no one ever talks about. Brazil's agroforestry, as well as Angola's solar micro are not charity. They must guide global climate strategy. And in other words, an Amazonian collective, for example, the forest, we have to accept that this is our kin. We use it to heal the earth. We must abandon systems that reduce life to profit. Justice is not optional, it is survival. And those are the points that I really wanted to drive and stress.
Yes, we can hear you. Dr. Gengi, we can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you.
So yes, my last words are: these particular models are not charity. They must guide the global climate strategy. Abandon many of these systems that reduce life to profit. Justice is not optional. It's basically in place for us to use as a survival tactic. Thank you.
Wow. Thanks a lot for this inspiring speech. I made here so many notes, Professor Ventura. I think that I have actually more than 100 questions for our Q&A, but I would like to ask if any of our colleagues want to break the ice and then make the first question. And if there's no question here at the chat as well, I think that I don't have access to it. So meanwhile, I will then break the ice. Professor Ventura, if you don't mind.
Sure, thank you, Professor.
Well, first of all, I'm very glad that you confirmed the fact that you are a one of a kind, a free critical thinker. Tremendous privilege that we have here at the Institute of Advanced Studies, the Amazonian Research Center, the Jean Piaget University, and the Ombala do Saber to have you as being our keynote speaker today. Thanks a lot. Muito obrigado. Yeah. Secondly, I have so many specific points here. I will try to choose at least 3 of them, if you don't mind. Yeah. A first, much more descriptive question would be related to the role of the Mayombe and Congo Basin ecosystems in supporting the protection of the vegetation or the loss of vegetation at the Sahel. Yeah, you know the region much better than barely we can find a person that know the region better than you. So what would be this concrete role? Yeah, this concrete network and exchange of practices, recommendations for actions there. And why my question? There is something that is unbelievably equal in the Amazon rainforest, and when we look at the Mayombe Sahel complex, yeah, which is the fact that the youths are better reshaped, will reshape it. Poverty prevails. Even if we compare the fact that there is a huge abundance in the Amazon, and then you look at the Sahel, you're going to see scarcity, right? In a nutshell. There's something that is common, which is the fact that poverty prevails, right? And whenever poverty prevails, there is a huge frustration of the youth, right? So then they are, of course, very prone to be recruited for criminal networks. The Brazilian militias, the Brazilian organized crime, the Colombian, the Latin American ones are completely different of when we compare to the organizations that are operating in the Sahel region. But there's this common grammar, yes, this frustration, the fact that the recruitment would be the legitimate opportunity that they do have. It will replace the legitimate opportunities. It will be the job that they will find available. So what we can do actually related to this new generation, that could be maybe the last generation that would be living in the Amazon and then in this complex. Can we rely on the Mayombe resources, right, to overcome the lack of legitimate opportunities at the Sahel ecosystem? Somehow, this is the question. Can we use the prosperity of the Mayombe region to share it with, let me call it, the dysfunctional background that we can see in many different areas of the Sahel? Yeah, that would be a first question. Secondly, can we, inspired by the fact that if we assume that almost 80% of the population living in the Amazon rainforest and also in this complex are suffering a lot under lack of decency in their daily routines, lack of decency in their lives. Yeah, they don't have access to clean water. You mentioned electricity. We are very familiar with the fact that they have dengue and malaria twice, 3 times in their life courses. Inspired by those health for all strategies, health for all ideologies, can we catalyze the collective action you are suggesting us to public health orientation? How radical would be that idea? Do you see any potential of that? Can it be impactful? Yeah. And then a third one, just to break the ice. Yeah. You mentioned in a very beautiful way that justice is not optional. I couldn't agree with you more on that. Justice is survival. Thanks a lot for such inspiring words. And then you put a lot of energy in the idea of climate litigation, right?
Yes.
But then we'll be facing some challenges related to our local institutions, right?
Yes, of
Let us
course.
just say that if not from scratch, they are very precarious, right? In many different ways. They are suffering a lot under lack of resources, lack of independency, extortion, corruption, etc., right? But also conceptually, it's very hard to conceive the idea of climate harm. It's very hard to convince a lawyer of the proximate causality of climate harm, etc. It's a very also frustrating path for us, right? And then you very critically you mentioned that there is no charity here. Yes, it's all about a new global strategy. Would you see that we should be emphasizing more on climate finance more critically go, the time to be soft in climate finance is over. We need to take that more seriously, because the way I see climate litigation will also be, it will take a long time. Maybe we don't have that much time to have more mature strategies related to climate litigation, and maybe we should be focusing more on on reviewing what we do, what we are talking about climate finance. I'm not sure if you got my point. Sorry for being so confused, but I tried to pose those three challenges, right? A more concrete, descriptive, related to the role of the Miami in giving hope to the new generation. Secondly, if we can radically focus the climate action on a public health orientation, and a third question, comparing or maybe challenging the idea of climate litigation for the idea of climate finance. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Eduardo, for the three questions. I will try to address it all in my one response. First of all, I'm a firm believer that life has a way of balancing out. I believe that what's rewarded early may have a high probability of suffering late, and vice versa. I believe that a lot of what's being suffering in the beginning has a high probability to be rewarded late. When you mentioned the youth, I feel are very important in this discussion that we're having today, because I feel that the youth dictate. They have a reference that we may not have. If you look at Angola, if someone was born in 2002, when we signed the peace agreement, they have no reference of civil war whatsoever. They demonstrate a level of courage that many of us on the call today may not have demonstrated at that particular time. So they're a little bit more courageous. They're a little less intolerant. They're more inclined to demonstrate a level of courage that will actually push and encourage change. I also wanted to talk about your second question. You mentioned the global South should never be viewed as a victim. It should be viewed as a blueprint. And I think when you push that narrative on both sides, and the youth can attach themselves to that without looking at Brazil or Angola as victims of devastation or degradation of the environment, and we start to push it as using ourselves as an example to demonstrate that we are actually the pilot program, we're the blueprint, we're the solution for other countries to follow. Much of this centering of indigenous stewardship, for example, renewable innovation and collective power, for me, it's non-negotiable for planetary survival. This is something you will hear me say in private. This is something you will also hear me say on public platforms. Colonial era extraction, this evolved into modern extractivism. And this is, for me, what perpetuates poverty and ecological harm. And this is something I will always continue to drive home. Communities revive sustainable practice. I'm a firm believer of this. When you mention Amazonian agroforestry, for example, Angola's desert combating water systems or collective action, these are what challenges the systemic neglect and corporate power. And I think, when we have a delegation such as these professors or representatives of these institutions who can come together and collectively push a very unified message, you'll have very much success. I think there needs to be more effort when it comes to redirecting finance. If you redirect finance, you make it very consequential. This is what helps you enforce accountability, and this is what also democratizes technology. And examples of that is AI deforestation alerts, for example, pollution tracking apps, and these type of mechanisms that I know that we can put into place. The last topic you mentioned justice, and I really am a firm believer that justice requires reparation. It doesn't really require aid. So that's something I will always push. And youth-led litigation, because they have the courage, because they may not have these generational ideas that we have as older contributors to this particular initiative, they can really demand intergenerational equity. And I feel that they need to be lured into these type of environments, and they need to be properly informed so that whatever we build at this stage of our careers, they're able to take it and build on top of it and take it to another level. And I hope I answered all of your questions. I did the best I could, trying to remember the 3 questions that you posed. So that's kind of where I am.
Amazing, thanks a lot. Alguns colegas aqui no chat estão perguntando sobre a questão do inglês e etc, né? Hoje em dia as ferramentas, né? E aqui o nosso evento é transmitido ao vivo pelo YouTube, né? Então no próprio YouTube você tem ferramentas de closed caption que fazem uma tradução simultânea. Claro que ela não é 100% correta, né? Mas você consegue acompanhar 90%, 95% do conteúdo. Já que o nosso objetivo aqui é formativo, ninguém precisa falar inglês como Shakespeare, né? Já que o nosso objetivo aqui é formativo, né? Se você usar essa ferramenta, que é gratuita no YouTube, né? Você já vai ter acesso a quase todo o conteúdo, tá? Para vocês aí no chat que estão perguntando sobre essa matéria. Professor Mosquito Garrido, do you wanna pose a question, debate? Do you wanna say something for us?
Professor Saad, and thank you very much. I would like just to say thank you in this first moment. I acknowledge the presence of Professor Samuel. Thank you very much, Professor Patricio, Dr. Carla, and Dr. Paulo English, and specials for our guest, Dr. Fulangenga. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I was on the trip and just landed, but I'll be here join everybody and try to be part of the process. Thank you very much. And I give you the words back to Professor Eduardo.
Any of our colleagues want to pose a question? Patricio, Professor Vitorino. Patricio, por gentileza, the floor is yours.
I don't speak very well English, so I try to make my question like this. What do you think about the COPs? COP is the Conference of Environment. I ask you if they are as an alternative to environment problem, because we see when they discusses the issues of environment, there are a lot of problems between rich countries and poor countries. I think this is not the way to make the alternative to environment problem. What do you think about this? Is important to make the COPs or not?
Yeah, I was present at COP28, and I didn't go as a participant. I went more as a delegate because I wanted to understand how I could further make a contribution in this particular environment. What I did witness was this imbalance that you mentioned. Rich countries have an agenda where they push their narrative and they try to get the poor countries on board to create a consensus. This is where I saw the first problem that needed to be addressed. The poor countries did not have an adequate platform to communicate the challenges that they had in their countries. And of course, these wealthier countries, even if it were communicated, I don't feel that those wealthier countries would be just as supportive as they would, as the poor countries for the wealthier countries in that particular environment. COP28 is a very large, influential type of initiative, but it doesn't address these countries I mentioned in the global south, for example. I didn't really see these particular countries step out front and have a level of global influence or the spotlight that some of the wealthier countries have. And I think that what happens when you have events like this, you have these wealthier countries that commit to sponsoring, and they have very large funding mechanisms. And of course, their voices are magnified in environments and events like this. So I just feel as internally, we could do a lot more in Africa. For example, if we had our own event where we could say, let's address what the problems that we have and highlight the issues that we have on the continent, and let's partner.
Acho que perdemos.
Okay, yeah, I mentioned in my presentation that to avoid colonial influence, you have to really focus on these South-to-South relationships that we have. When you look at Brazil, for example, this particular country represents the second largest population of people of African descent. There are more people of African descent in Brazil than there are in Angola. So yeah. I just feel that that's something we could capitalize on, and we could have our South-to-South relationships. We could benefit quite a bit from the dialogue between the two countries, and we can basically join forces to elevate our voice even on the same level as some of these Western superpowers that have this particular spotlight. I hope I answered your question, and I hope everyone understood.
Okay.
Professor Paulo Inglês, Professor Vitorino, Professora Carla. So, please, Professor Vitorino, the floor is yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Professor Ngenge. I have a question about that big program called Amazon Face. Amazon Face, a big program is going in Amazon about carbon dioxide. How can we integrate that program, not as a private university, but as a country? From my own.
Yes. I just feel the focus needs to be on, first of all, information exchange. You may know about that, but other people in Angola may not know about it. So I think it's very important to highlight this on both sides to make sure at the university level that there are concentrated efforts of people that are coming together and focusing primarily on this particular topic. There is a responsibility that comes with information exchange, because you cannot just sit on the information. You have to find mechanisms and ways to attract more people to come in and understand it the way you do. And you have to put those people in front to help lead the initiative and to gain some type of momentum that makes this a global message rather than a domestic or a local message.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Maybe it will be a issue for Umbala to saber that we together could make an effort to integrate a group of investigators from Mayombe.
Sure.
To join the Amazon Face. It's a big project. I heard about it. Amazon Face, yeah, okay.
Professor Eduardo, if you...
Yeah, please. Please, Mosquito.
I think he lost.
Professor Eduardo can talk a little bit more about that, because I remember last year he took me to the Amazon. And we start to visit all the community and try to understand a little bit. And Professor Eduardo is leading an initiative that is about Amazon. I think you can help a little bit talk about it also.
Well, thanks a lot, Mosquito. This is a project that we are running under the leadership of Carla Ventura, Ruth Estevam, our colleagues here, and in partnership with the public defenders of the state of Amazonas, especially with Dr. Carlos Almeida. Yeah, that's a project where we are giving voice to the local community leaders. Yeah, in a particular area called the Manaus Greenbelt, the Cinturão Verde de Manaus. Yeah, we already have more than 80 hours of interviews already recorded, right, Carla? And we are structuring this research based in 3 different levels. Yeah, social mobility, marginalization and violence, and then a positive section where we give voice to them what kind of public policies you truly need, you truly want, right? Because it seems a little bit arrogant that we academics, we are highly cultivated on public policies, and then we go to the field and then we simply try to very aggressively, in a paternalistic way, implementing public policies there without getting to know what they truly need, what they truly want, right? So that would be a completely mistake if we want to solve any of those problems, if we want to be useful for any of those communities without listening to them. This is a little bit what we are, the philosophy under this project, yeah? But if you allow me, Mosquito, I will turn back to our guest today, Dr. Ingenge. I'm actually very inspired by your words when you say that you want to challenge our imagination. And if you allow me, I want to exploit it a little bit more. There is a huge literature in the field discussing the environmentalism of the poor, and then in opposition with the environmentalism of the rich, right? I don't like that much this split, yeah, because I think that our imagination, or we can reimagine even the role of the business as usual or the eco business as usual, right? If we can outsmart them, and then we can use their tremendous amount of resources that they've been exploiting the last 100 or 2 centuries, right? Maybe it's also a very good opportunity for us to readdressing the role of the private sector. So if I can ask you, also in your inspiring words, you said that we are not victims. We should be seen as the blueprint, as the survivors. You mentioned many times the idea of, if I'm not wrong, you used the word seeds of resistance, right?
Yes.
How could we, in a smart way, create an interactive regime with the business as usual?
Well, I said that there must be a change of mindset. And I was very adamant to focus primarily on that. When I look at the screen, I realize we have 7 people here who could set a very strong foundation in terms of redirecting interest or highlighting certain challenges. And even before we end the call today, I want everyone to talk about some of the challenges that they have, that they also very important to not underestimate our ability here on the continent as well as in Brazil, because I'm a firm advocate of highlighting African intellect in general, globally. And a lot of, we don't get credit for much of the contributions that we make. And I feel that I have to always step out front to try to find a way to say, listen, for example, in my industry, people want to come and they want to have access to land in Africa, but we don't have that same access in a place like Dubai, for example. I don't drive down Sheikh Zayed Road and see tall buildings with Angolan flags on it, with Angolan names on it. And I'm wondering, you know, everyone is coming to Angola and they want access, they want diamond concessions, they want oil blocks, you know, they want to even change the names of our streets and put their names on it because they've invested a certain amount of money. But I want us to also be able to position ourselves in the same manner when it comes to having access to the other side. I really believe that we have quite a bit of talent, not only in Africa, but exclusively on this particular screen today. There's 7 very capable and competent people who can come together, exchange ideas, establish an initiative that can actually move the big picture forward. So it's just a matter of just identifying, challenging the system, coming together, making sure we all have accurate information, and allowing equal input from everyone so that no one gets neglected, no one gets left out, and we're all working towards the same goal and the same objectives.
Outstanding. So again, so thanks a lot for shining the lights for the intellects behind this climate network. I hope that in the next 2 or 3 months, working hard with all the webinars that we organize, that we can come up with a powerful idea on the climate network. Thanks a lot for your truly inspiring words and for supporting us as being our keynote speaker today. Muito obrigado. Yeah, Enze. Professora Carla.
I also want to thank you for your inspiring lecture to us and for your call to action that I think it's very important. And a call to action that is based on what we have, you know, as assets, and also what we are doing, as Eduardo said, in our program, in our projects, is finding evidence so we can act based on evidence. So this is also very important. Thank you so much for your lecture, and I think we have a very promising endeavor here in forming this network, in working together and finding our own solutions. Thank you so much.
Aplausos e muito obrigado.
Obrigado. Obrigado.
Um abraço a todos, muito obrigado.
Só gostaria muito, então, de agradecer a todos os presentes e dizer, agradecer principalmente a Thaís e todo o nosso pessoal de apoio aqui no Instituto de Estudos Avançados, por todo o trabalho, por todo o empenho, sem o qual a gente não poderia estar aqui. Agradecer de novo aos nossos parceiros e ao professor Eduardo e à professora Ruth por estarem aí liderando esse projeto tão bonito. Muito obrigada. Professor Eduardo, você quer finalizar?
Não, é isso, que a nossa rede climática seja uma ação muito poderosa da Universidade Jean Piaget, da Umbala, do ARC e do IEA Polo Ribeirão Preto. E, como eu já lhes antecipei, né, há muito interesse de colegas mexicanos, colombianos e moçambicanos para se somar aqui a esse esforço que definitivamente vai para além dos nossos povos e dos nossos países, Brasil e Angola. É algo que é de interesse planetário, é uma emergência planetária. Muito obrigado a todos aí mais uma vez.
Professor Sade, só para ver o que teremos na próxima sessão.
Perdão?
Não, eu dizia que era melhor anunciar o que teríamos também na próxima sessão, né? A próxima segunda-feira, dia 19.
Na próxima segunda-feira, agora você me pegou aqui de surpresa, eu já estou com o programa aberto. Deixa eu ver se eu acho o programa rapidamente.
Garrido, tu tens aí?
Tenho, mas também tenho que achar, mas acho que eu acho mais rápido que o professor. Mas eu sei que na próxima segunda-feira nós
Isso,
temos...
na próxima segunda-feira, dia 19 de maio, nós teremos a visita do general José Goma, né? e do doutor Arlen Souza, que é do Tribunal de Justiça de Rondônia, da Amazônia, né, para discutirem, para seguirem, darem andamento a essas questões de justiça ambiental e climática, nos mesmos horários de Brasil, Angola e, né, doutor Paulo, também aqui da Europa. Né?
Ok. Está bem, está bem, está bem. Vamos acompanhar, sim, sim, com muito gosto. Com muito gosto. Yeah. Sim.
Então, até segunda-feira, no mesmo horário. E deixa já
Aguardamos por todos outra vez.
Segunda-feira são tão brilhantes quanto o preletor de hoje. E temos muito para aprender.
Obrigado a todos, então. Grande abraço.
Muito obrigada. Um grande abraço. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, MZ, for your support.
Tchau, tchau.
Yeah. Tchau, tchau. See you.